From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. Could peanuts be protective against certain cancers? Why is copper an overlooked element for kind of supercharging our crops? And what if weather manipulation is behind climate change and not our incandescent light bulbs or cow burps and farts? This is episode 510, and our guest today is Matt Roeske. Matt is the founder of Cultivate Elevate. It educates and empowers people to rise above fear and seek out solutions for well-being. Today, Matt invites us to ask questions, as he does. He's going to highlight what he calls inverted truths, things that we've been told are bad, but are actually good for us, and vice versa. These include, for example, peanuts. He extols their health benefits today. Yes, peanuts that we've been told are full of mycotoxins. And copper, how for hundreds of years, humanity has used copper as a tool, and now we don't. We use iron instead. Why is that? Finally, he talks about what was the catalyst for him to consider that weather manipulation was taking place. He has documented the patents and the governmental documents. Matt has come across documents and patents that indicate that, yes, the government is behind this weather manipulation, and perhaps that is what's leading to climate change and not what we've been told. Finally, Matt shares conclusions from his research, and he invites us to get curious alongside him about the truth and the inversion of the truth. Before we get into the conversation, are you feeling overwhelmed, trying to live a more self-sufficient, natural kind of lifestyle? You're not alone. That's where the Gubba Homestead podcast comes in. Gubba's wisdom is like a breath of fresh country air, with practical tips on gardening, canning, raising chickens, and even creating a homestead, if that's what you'd like to do, in your suburban backyard. Every episode is inspiring and empowering, showing you that independence from the system is not just a dream, it's doable. So learn ancestral skills and reclaim your freedom. Check out the Gubba Homestead podcast. You can listen on your favorite podcast app. You're gonna love it. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Matt.
Hello. Thank you for having me on.
This is going to be a fantastic conversation. I can tell already. I'm so excited. I've been following you for a while, and I like the fact that you are just a regular guy trying to bring the truth to bear. You're also curious, and you do a lot of research. I want to start this conversation talking about peanuts, actually, because like you, I had a lot of peanut butter growing up. Tell us a little bit about your relationship to peanuts and peanut butter and why things shifted.
So this is a great one. And as a kid, like you just said, I was eating tons of peanuts all the time, tons of peanut butter. I ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for the first 18 years of my life. I'll never forget my mom switched it up and tried to give me like a turkey sandwich. And I remember I came home that day and I was like, what are you doing? Why are we eating turkey? We're supposed to be having peanut butter. But after about into my 20s, I stopped eating peanut butter. And, this is kind of where everybody started shifting to almond butter and this whole thing about almonds and almonds and almonds and almonds. And a lot of this stuff didn't make any sense. And a lot of people were telling me, well, that, they're allergic to peanut butter. They have allergies to peanut butter. And then the peanuts are whatever, something about the climate, about the peanuts and whatever else. And I started thinking, okay, it's kind of strange. And there was this large area of my life where I got rid of peanuts completely. And one day I thought, I saw Azure Market. They have an organic peanut butter. And I thought, I'm going to eat it again. Like, I just feel like there's something missing. Like, I'm kind of disconnected from peanut butter. And I remember I got a jar and I finished the entire jar in one day. And I thought, wow. And I started to think about EMF sensitivity. I started thinking about how we're missing certain nutrients. And the peanut has a lot of these nutrients. And I started going down all these rabbit holes about how when people would become allergic to peanut butter or peanuts, it was because they were vaccinated and they put peanut oil in the vaccines. It was an adjuvant 65. And then people started having all these peanut allergies. And I thought, wow, that happened just before they started transitioning people to eating almonds.
Mm-hmm. I remember I used to fly and they'd offer peanuts on the plane and then that stopped. And then I heard that in elementary schools, they would have like a no peanut policy for certain tables. And I was also scratching my head, like, what's happening? I put two and two together, as you did, about peanut proteins or oils being put in as adjuvants into vaccines and causing reactions. But I didn't know that there were nutrients in peanuts that do us good. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so I was getting into all like everything related to the fats and the vitamins that are in peanuts. And it's wild because you used to be able to run cars on peanut oil. The first diesel engine could run on peanut oil. So I started to think, okay, there's now seems to be much more of a reason that we've moved away from peanut oil because number one, you could use it as fuel. Number two, you can also use it as for lighting up lanterns. They were using things for like peanut oil and lighting up lanterns. And then it was a complete protein. That's what I thought was really interesting. They were talking about the vitamins and the minerals of peanut butter were a complete protein. And I thought, interesting, because our food, the food pyramid and all the nonsense we've been told, everything's always an inverted. And what was really weird is when I started talking about this, everybody started coming after me about mold. They're like, why are you telling people to eat peanut butter? There's mold and aflatoxins and all this stuff. And I'm like, I keep hearing the same response over and over and over and over. And I go, this is strange. It's like somebody's put out this memo and everybody read it. And all of a sudden we got to attack people with peanuts. So I started doing experiments. I started eating large amounts of organic peanut butter and I had no issues. I felt stronger. I slept better. My brain felt clearer. I felt like myself, like how I used to feel like in my 18 to 1920s, like that time. I never felt tired or lethargic. And I started putting two together and going, oh my gosh, this kind of starts to make sense. And then with the rollout of all the nonsense cell phone towers that they love to keep putting all over the place and whatever else, I started thinking about EMF sensitivity. And I started to think about how peanuts can help as a solution to EMF sensitivity. So if you wanted to roll out a new form of technology and remove a staple from the diet of all the people that was helping them and giving them nutrients and vitamins and all these things, this would be the one. And when I started getting into everything related to the health benefits of peanuts, there was George Washington Carver who had 300 different inventions with peanuts and all the stuff he was making with peanuts. So you start to sit there and go, okay, everybody used to be eating these. And now all of a sudden they vanish and we switch to this almond. And this almond doesn't make a lot of sense because there's a lot of water that's being used and all this. It's very inverted. We're going from the earth, which I've started to think about like roots, like deep in the earth, like everything that's deep in the earth, all of the alchemy that takes place because it's in the soil and it's in the earth. And that actually relates to Nathan B. Stubblefield and his inventions of the earth battery. So if you think about peanuts, same exact thing, with the earth energy and the earth batteries. And then we have almonds over here and you're switching. And the weird part about now we're taking it to the next level of almonds is when people used to eat a lot of almonds, they used to eat bitter almonds. The bitter almonds contain B17, and all of a sudden, it goes about the 1940s and 50s, they started switching out to the sweet almonds. And everybody started eating sweet almonds. So they lost the bitters, and then they lost the peanuts, and they got switched to something sweet that doesn't have the same nutrient profile anymore. And I noticed that this whole bait and switch took place in such a short period of time. And I started to think, well, maybe we need to go back. So I started going back to eating peanut butter and eating it and going, wow, this is what I've been missing the whole time. And then once again, every time I talk about it, I get attacked. And I'm like, it's just peanut butter. It's just nature gives us everything. Like there's nothing nature's going to give us to harm us. But unless we tamper with it and spray it with pesticides and do all these horrible things. And that's the other part, is I realized, like, for example, here in America, we lost a lot of our staple crops. A lot of the things that used to grow all the time and grow organically have all vanished. Even hemp, that's another one. It was banned by DuPont and lobbied against. So you start to see all these things that have been removed, and maybe we should go back. And that's kind of where I started going, I'm going to eat a lot of peanut butter again. And I feel great, and it's amazing.
They do say, you mentioned the pyramid earlier, we would do well to turn it upside down because what did they have at the top? It was fats. And that's what we definitely need more of. And so we started going skimpy on the fats and it started causing havoc with our health. But I want to understand the connection you're making between peanuts and EMF sensitivity. Are you saying that there's something protective about peanuts?
Yes. So I would say the oil or the minerals in the peanuts are providing the nutrients to help keep the cells healthy. Kind of like Dr. Tom Cowan talks about how the water falls apart with the EMFs, and then anytime you're pinged with too many EMFs, the water or the shell of the cell starts to fall apart. So same thing with those peanuts, they're bringing that back in. And I started to think about, wow, I've been impacted by cell phone towers. I've been impacted by all this stuff. And I started eating peanut butter, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm not impacted as much anymore. There's something missing. I can't put my single finger on what exactly it is because, our testing is so flawed. It's not even funny. But, I started to realize maybe there's some connection here. And then I had people in our Telegram channel, everybody bought a whole bunch of Azure peanut butter, and people started sending me messages like, this is the best thing ever again. And it's connecting them back to when they were a kid eating peanut butter and going, I don't know why I stopped. But it's wild because you sit there and think about how much we've been disconnected from and how certain things we maybe used to do as a kid, we don't do anymore. And those things are now impacting our health. So it's just an interesting thing. And it just made me realize a lot. And I went through a whole bunch of documents and papers. And there was a big one on cancer, too. They were saying that peanuts were protective or were anti-cancer for breast cancer, prostate cancer, and stomach cancer. And I thought, those are three of the biggest ones in America. And all of a sudden, the peanut is now gone. And prostate, we know, gets impacted by EMFs. So I started thinking, going, oh, okay, so something is fundamentally missing from us with the peanut. And then as that kind of went away, all of a sudden, those things also began to spike. Now, EMFs also went up. I'm not going to negate that. I can talk about that for hours, too, as well, and the radio signals and everything else. But it's interesting because certain foods were also removed at the same time. And then you see that, the chart just go up.
Yes, so interesting. Now, did you know, speaking of traditions and things that we did as a kid that we don't do now, one of the wise traditions of the wise traditions principles is to soak nuts and dehydrate them because sometimes there are anti-nutrients in nuts, right, that make them difficult to digest. Are you on that camp or you just go for peanuts no matter what?
So I've read into that in the soaking of the legumes, because peanuts fall into the legume family and everything. I've tried everything. I just kind of go with how I feel. But Azure feels like a very organic, natural brand. And I've kind of just gone with, if I find the right people who do the right thing, then I kind of feel that they're doing it properly. And then when I consume it, it's the same thing. But yes, I have heard about that and the soaking. Same with chickpeas, how you soak the chickpeas and everything. I've gone down that rabbit hole too. And for me, I think it's just exploring. A lot of the things is just me exploring, and changing everything. And like you said, going backwards and doing the opposite. I've been doing a lot of stuff with carnivore now and kind of understanding that and really going, makes a lot of sense. Like all these different things and just going with how my body feels and seeing where it goes from there. That's the best.
Yes. And going with curiosity. I love that. And so one of the things that first made you kind of come on my radar was how you started exploring, Matt, electroculture. And that is using copper, a simple copper wire wrapped around a stick, if I understand it properly, in gardening. Talk to us a little bit about how you got into that and what difference it makes to the produce.
So this is a big rabbit hole. And this goes back to the Rockefellers and them taking over the educational system in the 1900s, the agricultural section, taking over that as well. And you go back, you're going back to when a lot of things were changed. A lot of people were using iron. And so biggest misconception is we use lots of iron in our soil. We got iron tools, iron everything. And when you're putting all this iron into the soil, what you're doing is you're creating a lot of heat. And you're also creating a lot of rust. That's why the slugs start to come in. They're trying to clean up all that rust. And then when you put copper into the soil, all of a sudden the slugs don't come around anymore because they don't need to eat copper. They're just there to eat the rust. So when you get into our gardening and what we're doing, Victor Schauberger talked about if we use copper in our soils, we'll increase yields, we'll grow more food, we'll have more pollinators, more bees, more birds. And I did an experiment with this because when I started researching this topic back in 2020 and 2021, we were having the food shortages, that whole thing, that funny one that they were telling us. And I thought there's got to be a solution. And I started looking into electroculture electroculture and seeing that it dates back to 1835 and the Royal Agricultural Society writing essays on electroculture. Then I see that the U.S. Department of Agriculture is experimenting with electroculture. So I thought, I'm going to give it a shot because clearly somebody's onto something. And I kept seeing all these pictures of like giant tomatoes, giant potatoes, big produce, all these things. And I thought, okay, maybe the secret to the 2,000-pound pumpkins is energy. And we just don't understand that concept of the ether and all this beautiful energy of etheric energy that's all around us. So what I did was I got a piece of wood, I wrapped it with copper, I put it into my moringa plant, which was on the balcony, just on the main street with the noise and everything else. And I decided I'm just going to give it a whirl and see what happens. And my moringa pods that were produced were 17 to 22 inches. And I thought, wow, well, the average moringa pod is only 6 inches usually on average that I've seen, but these are produced in 17 to 22 inches. Then I had a friend who decided, I'm going to try the same thing. He was in Florida. He used 35-inch moringa pods. So then I started thinking, oh, okay, so the whole food shortages, we're just not utilizing the proper materials and we're not utilizing the energy. And when I started going through all of this, I actually started to go through the rabbit hole. Around 1933, you had FDR pass the Agriculture Assessment Act. And this act was saying that abundance was a burden and that farmers were paid to destroy their crops. And this was during the Great Depression when people were starving.
Abundance was a burden?
Yes, that's what he said. That's his quote. So you sit there and go, okay. So a lot of this stuff of all these people preaching electroculture from the 1900s to the 1930s till after World War II, they're all called woo-woo. They're all called sorcery and quackery and, all those other things. And so as I started to explore all this, I started to find all these people who've been practicing different forms of electroculture and having this remarkable success. And not only would they use copper, they would use color, they would use crystals, they would use sound, they would use all these different things that they would implement into their garden, and things would go bananas. So I started to realize that this connection between copper is something that we used to have. I mean, think everybody used to have copper pipes in their house. And then the government started paying people to get rid of them and switched to DuPont plastic pipes instead. But copper has a deep connection with us. There's still over 25 million people with copper pipes in America. So you start to sit there and see there's this really, really strong connection to copper. And as we switch to iron and made everything into iron, we had all this rust and all this heat come around. Then the soil started to get really clumpy, started to get hard to work with. And then people would do what? They would move to another land because they were like, oh, this land is not fertile anymore. So we'll just move to the next. And so with copper, what they noticed was when they would take copper shovels and they would stick them into the earth, they would slide right in. But with an iron shovel, the guy had to jump on it and step on it and try to get in there. So you start to see this disconnect or this disconnection from energy and materials and sacred metals and all of these things and how we're doing everything backwards. And the whole electroculture journey has completely blown my mind in the last 4 years because I realized that everything can be done using copper and all these beautiful materials and cobalt glass and uranium glass and all these different things that we use, stained glass windows that we used to have and all these things. We could be using all these things and we don't have to do the stuff that we're doing with pesticides and chemicals and fertilizers. And that's what Justin Christo Flo, with his talks on electroculture, all of his talks on electroculture in 1901 and 1905 were all about how we don't have to use chemicals. We don't have to use toxins. We don't have to use any of the system. But who owns that system? Rockefellers, Rothschilds. It always leads back to those two. And I've started to realize as every rabbit hole I've gone down, it always leads back to them. They have control over the food supply, they have control over the medical supply, they have control over the educational system, and they have control over the financial system. So when you have the control over those four things, you then control the people. And so what we have to do as a collective or a beautiful community is tap back into what we used to do and try some new things and see what happens. And so currently right now I'm working on a book. It will be done soon. That goes through so much of this information that I've kind of gone through. And I've shown all the before and after pictures of all of my beautiful people in my Telegram channel showing their beautiful results because I realized that we don't have to live in fear. We don't have to have a scarcity mindset. And we don't have to sit here and think like we should be dependent on grocery stores with LED lights and Wi-Fi inside of them and all kinds of weird things. We should be able to grow food for ourselves. So that's my mission on that. But it's been just mind-blowing going through this because I'm just like, wow, okay, cathedrals, stained glass windows, sound, frequency, bells, all enhance plant growth. So you start to sit there and go, okay, well, if I start doing the same thing, my plants should go wild too.
Yes, if you use sound, if you use copper, if you use light, those don't make any money for whoever wants to sell the fertilizer and maybe the pharmaceuticals because our back went out because we're working so hard, and it's like you've got to follow the money trail and realize our autonomy and our independence and our returning to wise traditions is better for us, but not necessarily for those in power or the status quo.
Well, and that's why a lot of these books were destroyed. A lot of these books were burned. A lot of these books vanished. Any of these things on these topics in newspapers, those also vanished as well. As I've gone through these rabbit holes, I've realized that a lot of this information has been removed from the curriculum, from us learning, all of these things, because then you control people. And you can tell them, like you could tell them the narrative like you just said. You could tell them what you want to tell them, and then people would believe because they go, oh, this is what we've been doing.
Coming up, Matt explains how we are now cut off from healing energies, and as author and freethinker Rudolf Steiner once predicted, we would be.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Optimal Carnivore. Organ meats are some of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, and the guys over Optimal Carnivore are well aware of that. This is why they have worked hard to make them accessible for us. They know that organ meats are not always easy to source or to make tasty. So they started sourcing 100% grass-fed organ meats from New Zealand. They freeze-dry the organs and encapsulate them into convenient bovine gelatin capsules. They chose New Zealand because it is a pure source, a pristine land with rich soil, lush greenery, and one of the cleanest environments on Earth. And their products are 100% grass-fed and grass-finished and free of hormones, pesticides, antibiotics, and GMOs. And since Optimal Carnivore is aware that our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal, they've developed a unique blend of 9 different organs. It's a powerful combination, and it includes beef liver, brain, thymus, heart, kidney, spleen, pancreas, lung, and gallbladder. It's a real nose-to-tail solution. Each organ contains its own unique benefits and nutritional profile and provides a large range of nutrients that support all of the body's major organs and glands. Optimal Carnivore believes that everyone deserves an easy way to access the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, and they want to take the guesswork out of it. These supplements are perfect for people on the go or simply trying to acquire a taste for organ meats. Optimal Carnivore also plants 1 tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. They currently have the grass-fed organ complex that I mentioned earlier, a grass-fed bone marrow, and a grass-fed liver product, along with their brain nourish and others. So go to amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code Weston10 to save 10% on all products. Again, that's amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and the code Weston10 to save 10% on your purchase. And Arvoti Skincare. Wise Traditions listeners are often looking for good, clean skincare. That's exactly what Gubba Homestead has provided. You might remember her from Wise Traditions podcast 495. Well, Gubba makes this skincare line, and it's quickly becoming a favorite for anyone who values natural, effective products. They have got everything: cleansing oils, revitalizing serums, and their famous whipped tallow balms, especially the best-selling Homestead blend. What makes Arvoti stand out is its roots and ancestral traditions, using natural ingredients and staying completely free from harsh chemicals. It's skincare you can genuinely trust, and the results, they speak for themselves. So if you're ready to try it out, visit arvoti.com and use the code WISE for an exclusive discount. Your skin will thank you. Again, that's arvoti.com, ARVOTI.com, and use the code WISE for an exclusive discount. This is Huda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Tradition.
Like when I first started talking about copper, people were like, we don't have copper tools. And I was like, we once did. We actually had a lot of copper and bronze and brass tools. But as those companies were bought out or they went under, iron took their place. And like you said, even with the fertilizer companies, phosphate fertilizer companies in Florida and all the poisons that relate to fluoride, because that's where that starts to lead into that rabbit hole. But all the fertilizers and all that, that's just toxic poisons that they're trying to sell people. And Rudolf Steiner talked a lot about this. He talked about how, in the future, they'll give you a bunch of poisons and they'll dim the soul and the spirit and things like that. So if you think of everything in an energetic way, even relating back to the peanuts, there's an energy that comes with everything. And same with copper. There's an energy that comes with it. And we just got to tap back into that.
Yeah. Well, and when you talk about energy, of course, it makes me think of 5G towers and non-native electromagnetic frequencies. Are these also attracted by those copper coils that we put in the garden, or are they somehow helping to stay off those non-native electromagnetic frequencies?
So this is an interesting one because I've started to think of the antennas as the primary energy because the Earth's energy is primary. The cell phone technology that they sell us is secondary, and it's very inefficient. I was actually just in New York City about a month ago, and I actually I went to antennasearch.com and I looked up Central Park, and it said that there were 9,000 antennas within a 3-mile radius around Central Park, and then there were 575 towers. The funny thing is even trying to do any GPS just to get a direction doesn't work. So then I sat there and thought, this is the most inefficient technology I've ever seen. Because how do you put 10,000 towers somewhere and none of them work? So that's what I started to realize. Like, they can put this stuff places, but the earth energy is number one. And when I got into like Nathan B. Stubbenfield's research with his earth batteries, his earth telephone, where he actually used to take a copper rod and stick it into the earth, and he would call his friends and family through the earth, I started to realize that there's much more potential with the earth's energy. And there's much more beautiful energy that is being pulsed from the earth all the time, rather than these man-made frequencies. So with the whole thing, I've realized kind of with the antennas, these antennas are not picking up on those frequencies. They're picking up on the Earth's frequencies and the pulses that are coming from the Earth. And this goes into the ether, and the etheric energy that's always pulsing around us all the time. But a lot of people, I've had people who live near this stuff, their plants still just do very well. So I started to realize that there is an energy, once again, that we do not see because we are not taught about it. And ether was removed off the periodic table around 1908. So then that whole thing was kind of taken away. And then we stopped learning about it. So we've been frozen in time seeing the tangible, but then we don't see any of the stuff that we can't see, which is another frequency.
Wow. So there's a lot to digest here, but I want to move on to another inverted truth, and it has to do with climate change. So we have heard the mantra so much that the earth is warming up or it's cooling down, whatever the case may be. They're saying climate is changing and it's because of either the cattle or humanity. What do you make of all that? Is that propaganda or is it based in some truth?
So there's a couple things with this. Some of the heating that they could say is taking place is the cell phone towers. They're heating things up. They're microwaves. I mean, if you go onto Arizona and you type in microwave tower road, there's a whole bunch of cell phone towers on there. So there are microwave signals which are being used within the realm. That's for sure. Now, with the whole climate change thing, one day it's cold, one day it's hot. One day the polar ice caps are melting and we're supposed to be flooded away. And one day, we're supposed to stay in our house and not use our light bulbs and whatever else. The narrative switches to whatever the narrative they would like to tell us so that they can have carbon taxes and try to say, that you need to pay more for this and then we need to track you for this. I've started to realize that it's such a scam when it gets into the whole climate change thing because of the fact that you have 3-letter agencies, Department of Defense, Department of Commerce, Department of Agriculture, modifying our weather on the daily basis. And I've shown this with the Weather Modification Act of 1976, weather modification documents from 1979, and all the 3-letter departments, which are all orchestrating climate change every single day.
Those acts and patents I've seen that are related to weather modification speaking on behalf of how the government perceives it and conveys it, they say we are trying to prevent drought by cloud seeding so that there will be rain. And maybe we're trying to, yes, manipulate the weather, but it's all for the people's good, like moving hurricanes away. For example, I think I did see a post of yours that showed a diagram of a plane's trajectory near where Hurricane Helene passed. But what if, Matt, the government was actually trying to move the storm pattern out to sea rather than to hit anybody in Tennessee or North Carolina?
I would love to say that they would love to do that, but through my research of all the things that I've started to research, like Project Cirrus, which is where the government and General Electric cloud seeded a hurricane in the 1950s and 60s, and it went horribly wrong, and they flooded all the surrounding towns and took no accountability for that. So this is the problem, is when you're messing with Mother Nature, because Mother Nature's so beautiful, and it does its beautiful thing. When you mess with that, you're going to get the other side. And this is what took place in Dubai as well. Dubai paid $11 billion to cause storms and get some rain, because they said they need some rain because they're running out of water. That's what they tell us. And they flooded the whole town and they put everything underwater. And this is the problem, is that when you're messing with the climate, you don't know, number one, the short-term problems that will be caused, and then the long-term. Like, for example, here in Arizona, the only time I see clouds is when a plane goes out and sprays straight lines in the sky, and then all of a sudden it becomes a new season. And that's what I started to realize, because here we have crystal blue skies every single day. So it's very, very obvious. And then all of a sudden they'll say, oh, there's a monsoon coming on the news. And I'm like, really? There's a monsoon coming. I'm watching it form as we speak. So this is where I started to realize that they will try to push this narrative of it's our fault. Like, how about this? Perfect example. They tell me it's my light bulbs. My incandescent light bulbs are the problem with the climate. And they say they're using too much energy. But an electric vehicle or AI uses 100,000 times more energy than my beautiful little incandescent light bulb.
Are you serious?
Yes, it's actually mind-blowing, the difference. And so they banned our incandescent bulbs, is switching people to LED bulbs, which are linked to cataracts and mess with the mind and are basically a street light. That's basically what it is. But so you ban that, switch me to this, and then tell me my light bulbs are inefficient, but then you use this technology on this side, which is horribly inefficient. So then you start to sit there and go, okay, well, what's the longest standing light bulb in the United States? It's an incandescent bulb called the Centennial bulb. It's still lit in California. It's been burning for 120 years. So if we're talking about efficiency, we've already had it. And that's the thing. So we get this whole bait and switch, and then you say it's my car's fault. Well, we've had cars that ran on water. We've had cars that ran on air. We've had electric vehicles in 1888. So you start to see all these things and go, well, we already had all that. But for some reason, we're not using it. And then now all of a sudden, it's my fault. And then they're going to spray, like you were just saying, the skies to fix the problem. But then it's like, what happens when you cause droughts? What happens when you cause tornadoes, hurricanes, and all types of things? And then you just say, like, whoops. And that's what we start to see, this whole, bait and switch of like, it's my issue. And it's like, but if it was that case, then why are you doing that? And another one to add to this, which people can look into, Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich created a cloudbuster in the 1950s, and it could counter the stuff that's going on in the air. And just about a couple years later, he was put in jail. When was the same time in which weather modification started taking place like crazy? 1950s, post-World War II, because they had access to all this information and thought, oh, okay, well, let's start messing with the weather and see what happens. And that's the thing, is a lot of people will say, oh, well, this is changing. Well, it's changing so rapidly that it doesn't make any sense. And if we look back in the past about what the temperatures were and the storms and all of these things, we start to see everything's on a cycle and repeating. And this is where it started blowing my mind. All these storms and all these things keep repeating. It's almost like somebody had access to technology a long time ago, and it's just been repeating over and over and over again because we're not aware. Because, for example, if there was a book or information which was published on this topic, it's gone. And then we don't know these things, so then we sit there and go, Operation Mockingbird is telling me the truth today at 6 p.m. So that's how I see it.
Well, I hope that this conversation is going to help people do a little research of their own. And I'm sure we'll get some links from you that we can share for people to check out the patents, check out some of the history that we've been discussing. Because I think people might have been tracking with us so far, Matt, on the peanut thing and on the electroculture thing. But I think when we talk about weather manipulation, a lot of people dig their heels in and think it's almost like a conspiracy theory. Like they don't think there's any evidence to point to the fact that the government is doing this, even though the government has out and out admitted it.
Well, and that's the thing. Like you can, simple search engine, just go to Google, type in weather modification patents, and it'll just come up with every single thing. And this is the part that people have to think about. These were approved by the United States government. Like if I try to submit a patent today, it has to be approved by somebody. I can't just send it in and it just gets posted. Someone has to approve it. And there was the 1951 Patent Secrecy Act, which is supposed to protect certain patents from getting out to the public because they could threaten the United States. So when you start to think about all these weather patents, which are just all publicly listed, here you go, this is how you design it, all these things, those would be threats to the United States. And when I started looking at Project Cirrus, Operation Popeye, Operation Sea Mist, all these different things which have been taking place over the country all the time, then I started thinking, well, what is real? Like, what are our actual seasons? And this is where I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole to try to understand. When did all of this begin? Because these patents date back all the way to the 1900s. What are the real seasons that we're supposed to be experiencing? Or are we supposed to be experiencing just like 80 degrees like an island every single day? So these are just things, and they're just, like I said, it's just asking questions, and I think everybody should do that. But that's how my whole thing began. And the whole reason that I went down this rabbit hole was in 2012. I was in Chicago, and there was a storm that came by called a derecho. And I was like, a derecho? I've never heard of derecho. They're like, there's a fast-acting derecho coming. And I remember the sky went completely green, almost like the Aurora Borealis or whatever that is. So I thought, okay, this is really weird. I've never seen this before. The storm just came in and just flooded everything instantaneously. It was very fast tracking. It was just a circle ball that just went over Chicago, flooded everything, and then went away. And I was like, what the heck just happened? I've never seen something like this. Then I started going down all these rabbit holes, all these different documents and weather modification and the U.S. Air Force attempting to control the weather by 2025 and all these different things and these patents and technologies which were used in war. Like, for example, Cuba used to have lots of sugarcane, organic sugarcane at one time. Well, they used weather to flood those farms out so that they don't have that sugarcane anymore. So you start to see all these things and go, okay, it's almost like somebody's using this stuff against us, and that's kind of what we're dealing with, and then trying to sell me something different. So it's a lot to take in.
It is a lot to take in. But sometimes I feel like it's hiding in plain sight too. Like someone told me that in 2001, there was a patent that was called, I forget what it was called exactly, but it was a hurricane and tornado control device. And literally, again, as you said, this was a patent that was approved by the US government. And it's like, could it be any more obvious that they are trying to use weather patterns to maybe alarm us about climate change and get us to swap out our incandescent bulbs for bulbs that are less healthy for us? Like it's kind of right there, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like Count Olaf. I don't know if you ever saw that cartoon. Where they're like Count Olaf, and he's basically like the bad person, and the kids are like, "Oh, he's right in front of you." Like they're like, "It's Count Olaf. It's the bad person." But yeah, it's kind of like that. And yeah, when you go through these patents, I was looking at patent yesterday from 2020 in June, which was approved, which was a patent to modify the weather using sound frequencies and steer storms. And it was disclosed to 21st Century Fox, which I thought was really interesting. Then they also talked about the Walt Disney. And I'm like, Walt Disney needs to know about this weather modification patent? Then it was the Aurora Advocate Health Fund, which is the 5th largest health fund in the United States. And then lastly, the Catholic Church. And I said and thought, why would the church need to know about this? And that's the thing. Like, the more I would dig into going through these things on weather modification, the more none of this made sense. But if you wanted somebody to believe things, or you wanted to orchestrate climate lockdowns type of nonsense, like they tried to do in 2020, with the pandemic nonsense. If you wanted to try to do something, you would make people believe so that you could try to push a plan. And we've seen this before, if we go on this topic, the running out of water topic, because this is a really big one. They always tell us we're running out of water on a planet that's all water. So it doesn't make any sense at all, first off. But second off, when you get into this one, there's a really good one for this. So Lake Elsinore, 1950s. Lake Elsinore, 1950 starts to run dry. All the people in the town start freaking out that there's no water in Lake Elsinore. So the geologists at that time decide they want to build a pipeline. This is the traditional story you always hear. They want to build this pipeline to get water to bring it into Lake Elsinore. Well, they build the pipeline and it runs dry. And there's a dowser, which when you get into dowsing, water witches or finding water, unlimited water underneath our feet, this dowser comes out and says, why don't you drill right here? There's water. There's a water vein right here. Just tap into that. And they said, we don't do dowsing. We don't do woo-woo, any of that. So they build another pipeline and it runs dry again. So the guy comes back out again and he's like, I told you the first time, you can just drill right here. It'll refill the water. And this is where we're getting into primary water. It's the water that's coming up from the earth every single day. This is why we're never running out. There's beautiful water veins underneath us. This is why people's basements flood. The water comes up from the earth into the basement. So there's beautiful primary water that has been shown by Paul Power. He's got some great work on this. Or the book New Water for a Thirsty World, which is another great one. But anyways, they drill where the dowser says, and they find water. And they refill Lake Elsinore. And he said, that's all you had to do this whole time. There was water right there. Lake Elsinore has never ran dry since this. Paul Power also drilled about 10 other wells in California, which have been pumping out millions of gallons every single day to this day. So when they say we're running out of water, there's unlimited water underneath our feet. And that's the thing. So they fixate us, just like you said, about cloud seeding. And we need rainwater, but we have unlimited water underneath our feet. So why do I got to mess with the sky? And the more crazy part is the government knows this. They assisted with the projects with Paul Power in the 1950s in California. So they know of primary water. And the book, New Water for a Thirsty World, was also burned in California. And it's like you sit there and go, why are you trying to get rid of this information? And why are you fixated on trying to give us this water from above instead of this water from below? And that's where when we talk about energy, the etheric energy, the water from below is spiraling. It's vortexing. It has life force. It has all that beautiful energy. There's no fluoride and chemicals in it either, too. So if you think about it, if you try to brainwash people that they need the atmospheric water, when there's all this groundwater underneath, you see once again how we've been duped. And that's, as my whole journey of the last 4 years or whatever it is just realizing I'm duped on everything. Like, I'll just admit it, because I realized, once I started looking, why are you pushing this thing so much? I started going, oh, wow, water was put on the stock market in 2020 to adjust the price. Just so happened there was a drought that summer, too. And you just go, wow, okay, now I'm starting to connect the dots. Or like you said, follow the money.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and people who know about the Weston A. Price Foundation have known that for a long time we've been advocates for examining everything we're told closely. Sally wrote the book Nourishing Traditions, and she said it was to challenge the politically correct diet dictocrats, like people who are saying we should eat this way. But she's like, wait a minute. What has served humanity since the beginning of time? And so she she invited us to re-examine the dietary guidelines and what we were being told versus what's really worked for humanity. And so I sense that in you, Matt, too. I love your curious spirit. I love the fact that you're exploring and you're testing things on yourself, too. We also tell people, pick and choose from the Wise Traditions dietary guidelines. You don't have to adhere to all 11, try them out and see how they go. And then you're going to find this newfound energy and strength and find what serves you best. But now, actually, Matt, I would love to talk to you more, but I'm going to have to wrap up. And I want to pose to you the question I love to pose at the end of every program. And it's this: if the listener could only do one thing, if they could take one step in a direction to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
Oh, barefoot grounding all the way. Just going out into nature and connecting to the pulsing frequencies of the earth is number one. The earth is just waiting for you. I've realized the nature frequencies that are all around us is just waiting for you to take part in it. The birds are out there that I'm feeding the chipmunks every day. The chipmunks come around. Everybody's just waiting for us to explore and be in there and be connected to nature. And when it comes to health issues, a lot of the times it's really people people are just disconnected from going outside. They spend too much time in places with windows that are blocking the UV spectrum, which is the most healing, and sitting indoors too much with too many screens and all this stuff, and not being exposed to that beautiful UV spectrum. And that's another rabbit hole. Light as Medicine, Jacob Liverman, and Health and Light, and those books. But being connected to nature, I think, is definitely number one. I think we just don't spend enough time in it. And if you spend enough time in it, you'll start to see, yeah, those clouds don't look real, and it kind of goes like that.
I love it, Matt. Thank you so much for your time on behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me on.
Our guest today was Matt Roeske. You can visit his website, cultivateelevate.com, to learn more. And I am Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of this podcast on behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for today's episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. Pam Jordan said this: refreshing, learning so much information in such an upbeat and refreshing manner. I so look forward to these episodes. Pam Jordan, thank you so much for your review. You too may leave us a review. Just go to Apple Podcasts, click on ratings and reviews, give us as many stars as you'd like, and tell the world why they should listen to the show too. And thank you so much for listening, my friend. Stay well, and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.